Thank you everyone for joining us. So today we will be talking about evaluation capacity building and evaluative thinking. So yeah, it's really about strategies to incorporate evaluation practices within your work. And this can be done within your organization or in conducting evaluations with community partners. I'll start with an introduction to evaluation capacity building as a concept and strategies to include evaluation capacity building elements within your work. And then Jennifer will then present on evaluative thinking and strategies to promote evaluative thinking within your day-to-day work as well. And thanks to everyone so far that has participated in the poll. Yeah, we just wanted to get a sense of who's on the call. So about a quarter of folks work as evaluators. That's great. About more than half of folks consider monitoring and evaluation part of their job. So that's also great. About 10% are keen to learn, which is amazing as well, and a few students too. So thank you all for that. And hopefully, this presentation can meet the needs of everybody on the call. And Alex will be monitoring the chat, but we'll most likely hold questions to the end. But also, if you're chatting with other folks on the call, feel free to engage in that discourse because we do want to make it as interactive as possible. So, evaluation capacity building. So how can external evaluators make a lasting impact? So, I've done a lot of external evaluation, and it's really hard to know the impact that your organization or that you may have had on an organization. We often are contracted to conduct an evaluation of a certain program at a certain point of time using outcomes defined by the funder. But how can we support our partner agencies even after we finish our projects? And I do think one way is incorporating evaluation capacity building principles in our work. So first things first, what is evaluation capacity building? I'll be using the acronym ECB because evaluation capacity building is a long term. So ECB, so definitions of ECB. So it's really it really kind of came into its own within the past, I'd say 20 years or so, where, I think people have been doing the work, but the scholarship on ECB has really kind of been emerging since the 2000s. So one way of looking at it, it's the intentional process to increase individual motivation, knowledge, and skills, and to enhance a group or organization's ability to conduct or use evaluation. Another way of looking at it is the intentional work to continuously create and sustain overall organizational processes that make quality evaluation and its uses routine. Now, I think those are great definitions, but there's really kind of one ultimate definition that has been used in the scholarship on ECB, and that comes from Prescott and Boyle in 2008. So they have, we'll get into the model in the next slide, but they have a pretty all-encompassing kind of definition that they propose. So ECB involves the design and implementation of teaching and learning strategies to help individuals, groups, and organizations learn about what constitutes effective, useful, and professional evaluation practice. The ultimate goal of ECB is sustainable evaluation practice where members continuously ask questions that matter, collect, analyze, and interpret data, and use evaluation findings for decision-making action. For evaluation practice to be sustained, participants must be provided with leadership support, incentives, resources, and opportunities to transfer their learning about evaluation to their everyday work. And sustainable evaluation practice also requires the development of systems, processes, policies, and plans that help embed evaluation work into the way the organization accomplishes its mission and goals. So they present ECB in this nice but slightly overwhelming model that you can see on the screen right here. So I'm just going to break down some of the components just to kind of add some clarity. So the left side of the model represents the initiation, planning, designing, and implementation of the ECB effort. The outer circle reflects the goal of ECB, which is the development of evaluation knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Within the circle, it is acknowledged that those who initiate ECB activities and processes have various kinds of motivations, are operating under a certain set of assumptions, and have implicit or explicit expectations for what the ECB effort will achieve. These motivations, assumptions, and expectations ultimately affect the design and implementation of all ECB activities. So in the middle, there are 10 strategies that ECB practitioners use through various teaching and learning approaches for helping people to develop these knowledge, skills, and attitudes to think evaluatively and to engage in evaluation practice. So I'll get to those 10 strategies in a bit. But one thing to recognize is that you can often use these strategies interchangeably or together. So it's important to use a number of different strategies when you're considering ECB work. So connecting the two large circles is the double-sided arrow, called transfer of learning, which refers to the application of evaluation knowledge, skills, and attitudes to the work context. So actually applying what you've learned. This transfer of learning links the ECB effort to what is required to sustain evaluative thinking in practice. So on the right side of the model are the processes, practices, policies, and resources that are required for sustainable evaluation practice. Through your ECB work, you can support the development of many of these pieces. Although it may be difficult to achieve all of them, these are goals or aspirations for those who see evaluation as a means of achieving individual, group, and organizational learning. And the final component on the bottom is diffusion. The hope is that ECB participants learn about evaluation, have the potential for sharing their knowledge, skills, and attitudes with a wide range of audiences, including coworkers. As they share their evaluative thinking and practice, others will be inspired to learn about and engage in evaluative practice as well. So it looks a bit daunting, but I think, breaking it down, it really kind of demonstrates from tip to tail how the ECB process works. So it's important to start, thinking about ECB as to why organizations want to engage in it. And there's usually like a triggering kind of reason or a motivating reason for the organization. And this can be either external, internal, or a mix of both. So some of those external reasons, are, a need to meet accountability requirements, changes in the external environment. So that could be, increased acceptance of evaluation in the public sector or new political appointees, and a desire to enlighten and support government policy making and planning. From internal motivations, that could be changes in the organization, reorganizations, new leadership or vision, a mandate from leadership to increase the learning function of evaluation, a desire to seek new or increased funding, perceived shortage of evaluators with expertise and background in specific program content or specialized organizations, and a desire to use evaluation to make program improvements. So understanding these motives are important, as it allows you to tailor a strategy to build evaluation capacity, but also to help an organization see the other side of the coin. So if an organization is motivated by external factors, you can work with your stakeholders to also develop intrinsic motivation to engage in evaluation work. By shifting thoughts on evaluation as something that must be done to something that can improve the efficiency and efficacy of a program, you will increase buy-in and promote the sustainability of ECB. So getting to those 10 pieces that have been used to promote ECB within organizations. As I said earlier, Preskel and Boyle really encouraged the use of several different of these methods in your ECB work. And for me, I found that, that's really critical in, applying ECB work in the field. So an example of something that I did, so I worked with an emergency shelter to work on a small evaluation of one of their programs, along with building internal evaluation capacity. The work stemmed from a board member who had experience in research and evaluation and suggested that the organization could build the research and evaluation capacity. The organization was running great programs, but lacked the capacity to engage in in-depth internal evaluation work. So there was strong internal motivation for ECB to occur, but there's also the understanding that sharing evaluation results with funders could result in enhanced funding opportunities. So really identifying those motivations early on. So the work began with a consultation of what their needs were. It was decided to do something participatory, as well as some trainings, the development of written materials, regular meetings, and technical assistance. The hope was that by building evaluation capacity and starting on a small evaluation of one of their programs, that they could expand their evaluation to other programs that they offer. So in terms of trainings, I found that starting with an evaluation 101 was really helpful, and then subsequent trainings on the types of evaluations that organizations may want to engage in. These included logic models, outcome measurement, needs assessment, process evaluation, and outcome evaluation. It may also be helpful to include strategies for data collection, data analysis, and presentation of findings. To accompany some of these trainings, I created a program evaluation overview document that the organization could reference as they began to plan or conduct internal evaluation work. Of course, this manual could not outline every evaluative technique, so I did include some links to other online resources. At the end of the project, I presented the results to the board, and the work actually culminated in the organization hiring a research and evaluation manager to broaden the organization's research and evaluation capacity. So through this example, you can see how it is often important to incorporate a number of different ECB strategies. You also notice that this list many strategies you may engage in your regular evaluation work. For example, when conducting an evaluation, it's often important to present to your stakeholders and evaluation participants some evaluation primers, a workshop on evaluation methodology, regular meetings, and other ways to involve individuals in the evaluation process. Although these are regular parts of the evaluation process, it may be important for evaluators to engage in this work with an intentional focus on building evaluation capacity at the same time as completing deliverables for your evaluation. It really comes down to identifying teachable moments to your evaluation participants and recognizing windows of opportunities for this to happen. So other ways to build ECB strategies using collaborative, participatory, and empowerment evaluation. So in each of these evaluation types, stakeholders and evaluation participants are embedded within the evaluation process from the beginning. And for those of you who attended last month's evaluation series webinar, you'll remember the steps to engaging in participatory evaluation. And for those unfamiliar with participatory evaluation, you can check out the presentation on MAP's website. The researcher Laban and colleagues also suggest that evaluators conduct needs assessment prior to engaging in ECB in order to understand attitudes toward evaluation, availability of resources, and internal evaluation expertise. Another example that I used in my work was particularly helpful in an evaluation I conducted with the youth housing program. So I think typically with ECB, it's focused on staff members of an organization, but the agency I was working with also wanted to engage in some ECB work with young people in the program. So this was a great suggestion and kind of pushed the evaluation in a more participatory nature. I started out my engagement with young people by a site visit to the different housing locations. Then I introduced myself and explained what would be happening over the next few days of my visit. The following day, we had a lunch and learn where I discussed the evaluation process, the terms that were going to be used, like logic models, stuff like that, and why we were doing the evaluation in the first place. And then we engaged in some logic model and outcome measurement work. Again, this served as an opportunity to gain buy-in from the young people, but also as a way to show what the evaluation process looks like, and perhaps most importantly, why the evaluation was happening and how the evaluation findings will be used. In a sense, it served as an accountability mechanism as well for the program, as the young people could ask how the program is implementing recommendations that stemmed from the report. It may also, reduce hesitancy for young people to engage in evaluative work in the future, and potentially demonstrated a career path in evaluation for interested young people, or how to include evaluative thinking into their future employment. So other ways to build ECB strategies, we can think about the individual level, so focusing on the attitude and attitudes of workers related to evaluation, as well as developing an evaluation curriculum. And at the organizational level, thinking on collective activities such as using evaluation as part of organizational processes and practices, providing leadership support for evaluative activities, fostering a learning culture, mainstreaming evaluation by making it a more routine aspect of how the organization functions, or increasing resources for evaluation, which, as we all know, is really important to really sustain these practices. So kind of getting at the right side of the model that I presented, what are some of these sustainable practices that have been found in day-to-day operations of an organization or in strategic plans or pieces like that? So Prescott and Boyle highlight about 8, I think, strategies that really demonstrate that ECB strategies have worked. So there are evaluation policies and procedures in place, evaluation frameworks and processes in place as well. There are resources dedicated to evaluation, which is a big one. Organizations are actually using evaluation findings. There's a sense of shared evaluation beliefs and commitment within the organization and among staff, integrated knowledge management, evaluation systems, strategic plans for evaluation, and continuous learning about evaluation. Now, you may not be able to have all these pieces fall into place, but it's just things to consider when developing ECB strategies. Of course, you want to evaluate how you're doing as well. And these kind of outcomes are focused more on the individual or staff perspectives when you're engaging in ECB work. So cognitive outcomes are people's knowledge on evaluation concepts, terms, and approaches. Have that increased since beginning your work? Have people's ability to conduct evaluations and teach others, has that increased since beginning your ECB work? Have you decreased anxiety and fear around evaluation? And perhaps some more longitudinal pieces, has the organization been able to attract more funding, increase accountability, and increase overall program quality? So these are considerations you can take when evaluating your own ECB work. Also, obviously, you're going to run into some barriers. So again, Lavin and colleagues stated some external, individual, and organizational challenges. The most common are organizational challenges to sustain these evaluation practices, and oftentimes that's tied to resources. At the individual level, when working with staff members, you may not be able to really, change some people's attitudes about evaluation. As an evaluator yourself, there could be a conflict between evaluating and providing services, as well as internal evaluations as well, and applying knowledge and learning evaluation subject matter. So, these are kind of things that evaluators can consider before they go into to try to address. So just a couple more slides, and I'll pass it over to Jennifer. So what are some kind of best practices that have been found in the literature? So when you're kind of coming into an organization, consider working with one staff member within an organization, and really kind of work with that person collaboratively, maybe set up some meetings with them, and really kind of, work on a strategy to understand where the organization is at and where the organization could be. So I think really having those one or two key people who are often in a senior position can really kind of facilitate the process of ECB. And then Presco and Boyle again, they did another study, and they actually interviewed folks doing ECB work, and they found that oftentimes it's an organic process that happens. So, even though you do a needs assessment, you have to be flexible when considering ECB strategies. So really getting to know the organization, I think, is really critical, really understanding where they're at in their evaluation journey, and really kind of, developing those relationships and rapport is really critical to see what ECB strategy will fit best within the organization. So I think, you see in those bullet points, understanding the organization, building strong relationships, and developing rapport are really critical to really having successful ECB strategies. And last but not least, Volkov and King in 2007 released an ECB checklist. So you can actually check that out, and they provide, I think there's 6 different components that you can kind of check to see if you were meeting kind of some ECB strategies or kind of markers to really guide your work. And it's a progressive kind of scale, so it kind of starts from the beginning, but it kind of outlines some strategies to use, and then you can kind of, obviously check them off as you go along. So it's a pretty quick overview of ECB, but hopefully it was helpful. And now I will pass it over to Jennifer.
Thanks, John. Share my screen here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about evaluative thinking, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the thing that we do when we are thinking about things from an evaluation perspective. So I like this picture because I like the metaphor of kind of like putting on your evaluator hat, your evaluative thinking hat, when you go into a situation. And there's a component of it that's really intentional and deliberative. So you're kind of considering the merit, the worth, or the significance of something, and you're doing that with intention. So I'll just talk a little bit about what evaluative thinking is and why it's worth doing and what can kind of come from it when it's done well. And then I'll talk about some practical strategies that you could try in your organization and in your role. So I'll start with some sort of wordy definitions of evaluative thinking from the literature. So evaluative thinking is critical thinking motivated by an attitude of inquisitiveness and a belief in the value of evidence that involves identifying assumptions, posing thoughtful questions, pursuing deeper understanding through reflection and perspective taking, and informing decisions in preparation for action. It's a willingness to do reality testing, to ask the question, how do we know what we think we know? Evaluative thinking is not just limited to evaluation projects. It's an analytical way of thinking that infuses everything that goes on. Evaluative thinking involves being results-oriented, reflective, questioning, using evidence to test assumptions. So I think there's some good stuff there, and I kind of just pull out the key terms that I see here. I like this term reality testing, deeper understanding, value of evidence, lots of good things here when we think of evaluative thinking. So I like to drill it down into kind of 4 key things that you're doing when you are an evaluative thinker. The first one's kind of interesting here. It's this idea of suspending judgment just for the time being. So when you put on your evaluative thinking hat, it's a little bit different than putting on your judgy pants. You're not doing that. You're just really being open, and you're really willing to kind of be curious and explore things, and you're not judging things yet. So that sort of open-mindedness, that fair-mindedness. You are questioning assumptions, so especially the sort of unstated assumptions and claims, the things that we don't talk about and that are just sort of like simmering right below the surface. That's the juicy stuff you're interested in when you're doing evaluative thinking. You're also really keen to explore multiple perspectives and viewpoints. So you're really attuned to the fact that you can only see things from your one perspective, and that you have to actively go out and search for and seek out multiple perspectives, so that you understand where other people are coming from too. And then similar to the judgment piece, I think there's this commitment to engage in divergent thinking. So not just sticking to this one narrow path and sort of thinking that you have this one solution. It's really being willing to consider that there's many different ways of seeing something, there's many different possible solutions, and you're really searching for all the possibilities. So I like to think of us as these curious little cats, this sort of habitually inquisitive nature. That's an evaluative thinker. You're just really striving to demonstrate intellectual humility. So I like this idea, right? That you're willing to consider anything. Anything's fair game, including your own biases. You're really willing to explore those and acknowledge those and interrogate those a little bit in your work. So being open, fair-minded, pursuing relevant information, and pursuing sort of like increasingly precise information, right? So you're being really persistent, and you're trying to like get to the bottom of things. That's an evaluative thinker. You have to be flexible, you have to be courageous, because sometimes this leads to some tough conversations, but you have to act with integrity as well. And really, when you do get to that judgment point where you are looking at like merit, worth, or significance, there has to be an element of integrity there, that you're coming to a sort of sensible and wise judgment in the way that you've been working. So I hope you like cats, because I'm going to run with this metaphor for a little bit longer. But I like the idea of evaluative thinking as sort of being a building block to some of these other pieces, like evaluation practice and evaluation capacity building. So, John's sharing about ECB, and I see evaluative thinking as being one sort of building block or core component within that broader framework. And of course, it's evaluators that are doing evaluation, doing the actual practice of evaluation and producing something, following that process. But sort of like recognizing that the key to that, or the magic in that, is the way that the evaluator is thinking, and that thinking, that sort of approach to thinking is useful for everybody. So you don't have to be an evaluator to think evaluatively. So it's useful for policymakers, for politicians, for people implementing or delivering a program, and just to the general public too. This is just a way of thinking that can help everybody in their work. And yeah, I like the idea of, as an evaluator, ultimately your sort of driving thing, or your core purpose, your anchor as an evaluator, is that you're trying to support social change. That's the goal of what you're doing. And that evaluative thinking can further that goal when it's practiced by people in all sorts of roles and positions. So some kind of classic evaluative thinking questions that you're likely to be asking yourself if you're thinking evaluatively. What's going on? What's going on for this person? What's going on in this situation? What's going on when I step back and I look at it all together? What's new? Where is the action taking place? Where's the movement and the change? That's something you're really interested in. And then what does it mean? What's the big picture? What's the point? How does it make sense? And sort of the cross-cutting theme across all of these questions is that commitment to shifting perspective. So trying to see something from someone else's point of view, and also asking a little bit like, who's at the table, whose perspective is represented, who's missing, and why. And those are kind of all the sort of core questions that you're asking. And so the whole hope or the idea is that with evaluative thinking, you're paying attention, you're questioning things, even mundane things, even things that you thought you knew. You start to see things that you never noticed before, maybe even some things that you might have taken for granted otherwise. You see connections, relationships, potential opportunities that previously were hidden. So things start to reveal themselves to you through evaluative thinking. And of course, this is sort of like the treasure trove of evaluative thinking and why it's worth doing and what we hope it can lead to. So it really is a way of thinking that helps us when we're trying to foster innovation, new ideas, risky ideas. Evaluative thinking really supports that type of movement. It also really helps when we're trying to be adaptable, when things don't go according to plan, when circumstances change, maybe when you're dealing with a lot of ambiguity, you have to adjust things, you're sort of navigating that uncertainty. Evaluative thinking can be your kind of guidepost in that situation. And ultimately, you know, in a lot of our work that we're doing, it's these sort of complex, you know, wicked problems that we're dealing with, and evaluative thinking can help us in that. So I like to kind of acknowledge that without evaluative thinking, we're a little bit flawed in the way that we approach judgment and analysis of a situation. We're a little bit clouded, if you might. So we're prone to these mental shortcuts, these sort of patterns of thinking. We really love to just sort of pick a perspective and run with it. So that's kind of our cognitive bias. So even if we do sort of set out with good intentions to engage in evidence-based decision-making, we get that sort of confirmation bias, right? We lead towards a particular conclusion, we pay more attention to any sort of data or evidence that just supports that one position, and we get stuck in this like belief perseverance where we cling to that initial belief that we might have had. We're a little bit numb to any new information, receiving any new information that might contradict or just disconfirm what we originally thought. And so evaluative thinking, of course, is a way of sort of clearing some of those clouds away and helping to reveal some new ideas in the process. So how do we nurture and create this nice environment for evaluative thinking to happen? So first off, does have to be this intentional component. I think there's a piece about naming it, right? Saying evaluative thinking is a priority for us in our work and in our organizational culture, creating space for it, like creating little reflection spaces within our team and within our work, developing some tools to facilitate evaluative thinking. It's really, you know, this kind of deliberate, intentional process comes through. And we kind of create this environment, this enabling environment. So I think that's where we get at evaluative culture in an organization, this climate of being open to questioning different perspectives, to really valuing challenge, valuing that openness, genuine dialogue, and a commitment to basing decisions on evidence deliberately. And then, of course, having leaders who support evaluative thinking is key. So having those sort of champions amongst senior management, maybe reflecting evaluative thinking in job descriptions or your performance plans, actually investing in your staff's capacity to do evaluative thinking. So, you know, through professional development opportunities, and creating procedures to actually engage in evaluative thinking, both internally, but also externally with the partners that you work with. And then there's some things that can really, on the flip side, kill the vibe and really starve evaluative thinking, that we don't want to be doing these things that inhibit it. So one way that we can really get in our own way with evaluative thinking is being too focused on project thinking. So this is like when we're really looking at just our work as being part of this one point in time project. If challenges come up, we think of them as something that can be, you know, controlled and managed. We think of the project as just sort of this like scheme that has to be applied and implemented, and we monitor it along the way. We've got some indicators and some checklists and that kind of thing, but we're really just focused on this project. And we stop sort of asking those bigger questions about like our project being this bigger innovation that in and of itself can be questioned and is a fair game for questioning, I guess, and how our project fits in as part of a catalyst of sort of ongoing long-term change. and sort of, backing up a little bit and seeing how we're nested in this broader system. And similarly, we get stuck in these really narrow roles. So maybe you're working on a project that has an evaluator, an external evaluator, for example, or maybe you have somebody on your team who is an evaluation specialist. And we sort of just say, okay, well, evaluative thinking is their job and they're going to take care of it and that's fine. But really, we shouldn't fall into this trap. Evaluative thinking can be done by everybody and should be done by everyone. We also have this sort of strange expectation of a solution as like a one and done thing. Like, okay, there's this problem. We came up with the solution, the one solution for it, and we solved it once and for all. And it no longer requires sort of like ongoing inquisition. Whereas with evaluative thinking, it's really pushing us to look for solutions that are more flexible, they're continuous, they're adaptive, and it's ongoing. We're always going back and examining and questioning. It's not just done and taken care of and filed away. And of course, political pressures, that definitely can kill your evaluative thinking. If you're really trying to hide your failures or to really tout your successes, that does not create a good climate for evaluative thinking. So if you're really trying to, you've got a lot of pressure to demonstrate results, then it's hard to really engage in evaluative thinking. So I like to think ideally of evaluative thinking as really into your everyday work life. So we could look for opportunities to embed evaluative thinking in your meetings, your retreats, your presentations, maybe communities of practice at your organization, board meetings, anything like that. But it could also be something as simple as a coffee break. That's where evaluative thinking can happen. So really being open to all these naturally occurring opportunities. So this is a little bit sad, but when I originally made this presentation a couple of years ago, the example I always used to use was like when you are going to a meeting or an event and you're in the car with your colleagues and you go to the event, you have this big workshop, maybe a meeting at a partner's office or something, and you're all coming back in the car ride together back to your office. And it's sort of this like naturally occurring time when you're engaging in critical reflection. You're talking about what happened, you're debriefing, and it's, of course, now it never happens. We're on Zoom and it's really impersonal, and I haven't been in a car with my colleagues in a long time, but I think the idea still stands, right? We're looking for these naturally occurring opportunities where people are sort of already intrinsically motivated to engage in that critical thinking. And it's like, how do we take advantage of that? How do we capture that? I like the idea too of being incremental in this. We don't have to start with the most like politically risky or sensitive topic. You can practice evaluative thinking on a more neutral topic to begin with and sort of scaffold and build from there. This, I do start to sound like a little bit of a broken record, but for sure, including everyone, that's so key, involving every member of an organization in talking and thinking evaluatively, and really practicing this in multiple contexts with diverse people. So too often we get stuck where we just talk about our work with like-minded people, and we miss the opportunity to talk to others and get their perspectives and their ideas, which then naturally fosters our own curiosity, because we're like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. Now that's making me curious about what is really going on here from someone else's perspective. So really looking for those opportunities to talk to diverse people about what's going on. So, colleagues, partners, participants in your programs and projects. This piece about identifying assumptions, what can help us here? I like having a champion. So if you have a meeting or an event going on or a discussion that's happening, you sort of give the role to one person. You can delegate just for that day to one person to be the one that's going to look out for and sort of identify the assumptions that are under the surface. And this can be a rotating role or something, but it's just acknowledged openly that this person's going to hold space for sort of looking for assumptions today. And it's also about setting aside time. So I think sometimes we get too focused on being solutions focused, right? We're trying to move too quickly towards a resolution. But a good way to hold space for evaluative thinking is to take one step before that and say, okay, we're not going to move on yet to a solution or a decision. Let's take time to first just discuss the issue itself and engage evaluatively in understanding the issue first. And then my last point here is just that you can do this both in like really structured, formal ways, like with tools or policies or whatever, but you can also do it informally. So I like the idea, it's a little bit corny, but sort of like setting out like a meeting motto. So like even this idea of like, how do we know what we think we know? Like say that's the motto for your meeting. And it's a little bit jokey and lighthearted, but throughout the meeting, people kind of ask that, wait, how do I know what we think we know? And it just sort of like, again, hold space for digging a little bit deeper. And I also like the idea of taking appreciative pauses. So pointing out and acknowledging when somebody is thinking evaluatively and you're kind of thanking them for their contribution and saying, oh yeah, okay, thanks for bringing that in. And again, naming it and adding that intentionality to your work. And here's a little exercise that is maybe a little bit more formal or structured that could work for you. We called it chalk talk. So this idea, you start with a silent reflection, and then it's followed by a verbal group debrief. So you might write a relevant question or data or piece of findings up, and everybody sort of takes the time to silently on their own personally reflect on it. They might record like a response or reaction to it. And then there's this interactive piece where people can go around and maybe circle someone else's idea if they thought it was interesting, or draw like a link between ideas, add their own reflections on top of it, connect to ideas, and sort of, yeah, interact with each other's work. And then finally, you finish with a debrief and you ask one of those kind of key evaluative thinking questions, right? So what might other people's perspectives be on this? Or how do we know that this is true for our organization, and facilitate it in that way? And one more kind of activity, again, that's a little bit more structured, something that's a bit creative, maybe a bit more artistic. So participants would take a few minutes to draw a picture or to pick a picture, like a stock photo or something, or even make a model, like you could work with clay or Play-Doh or something. And it's all about how you see a chosen topic and just really kind of trying to look at it in a different way. And then you can have a group discussion afterwards about what's sort of similar or different. And I just had an example of this week. I was working with a team and we were trying to come up with pictures that represented something about housing. And it was interesting. A bunch of people put like a picture of a house, and that was sort of like, but then someone else put a picture of a check. And that led to some interesting conversations of how they're seeing like, oh, okay, like a subsidy or a rent supplement, as opposed to, just the physical structure of a house. So sometimes it can lead to interesting conversations that way. And then lastly, I'll just finish with kind of commenting a bit about how evaluative thinking can be embedded along the timeline of a project, or sort of at each different stage. And depending on what your work is, this might look a little differently for you, but I'm just thinking of how, in my work, how we work through a project. So in those kind of early stages, when you're first assigned or first starting a project, what does evaluative thinking look like then if it's embedded into your work? So of course, a good thing to do would be to go look at the literature, right? Kind of going back and creating that foundation before you get started on your project, seeing what worked in the past, what's been done in the past, and how does this connect? You might consult with others, maybe colleagues internally or externally who've previously done similar work, and you're asking them some sort of evaluative thinking questions, like about what they learned or recommendations, what they would do differently. And you might go back and review some documents from your own organization or others that can tell you about what happened in previous work. And so this is, again, about a way of getting out of that like project thinking, that narrow thinking, and sort of pushing you to sort of see this new project that you're about to embark on as nested within something that's happened in the past and is part of a more ongoing, bigger movement. And then, so now you're just getting started, you're actually planning and getting going with your project. And you could still do evaluative thinking now. So one practice could be to bring everyone in your team on board and contribute to the development of a logic model. So this is, obviously a core evaluation tool, the logic model, but it doesn't just need to be an evaluator that does it. Everybody in the team could be involved in thinking through and creating a logic model. And then, hey, when you're done, you don't necessarily need to tuck it away and never look at it again. Maybe you, again, if we're in an office setting, but you print it out and you laminate it and you post it on your wall, and it sort of becomes this living thing that everyone sees and goes back to and becomes more of the conversation going forward. You might also want to, from the beginning, think about what information you need to capture that could help tell you the story of what you did, when you did it, who was involved, have somebody who's sort of accountable for tracking that information. Maybe it's through meeting minutes, or, who was attending at meetings, feedback forms, surveys. This is, again, a way of like understanding whose perspective is represented and whose perspective is not, and who's missing, and that you might have to go out and seek. And I like to do this a notes to self document. When I start a new project, I sort of, pin a new document to my desktop, and it's like, all of the things that I'm noticing about what's working well, what maybe isn't working well, times when we're adapting or shifting, and just sort of like things that I want to keep an eye on in the project for myself, and keeping a record for it and going back to it once and again. And then once things are really underway and you're really in the swing of things with your project, evaluative thinking might look like going back to your logic model every now and then, you know, seeing if anything's changed, or if, again, it's like a living document. Sorry. You might, again, trying to receive multiple perspectives and hold space for multiple perspectives. You could do some one-on-one check-in calls with stakeholders. You could do some temperature checks with people, with groups that you're working with, just to, again, kind of gather that perspective. You could commit to doing debriefs after major meetings or events. And before an event, you could review notes from the last time. Sorry, I think this is a COVID problem. I haven't talked this much in a while. Just one more slide here. So, and when you're finishing and wrapping up, it's important to have everybody involved in doing your final report. And this is a good time to go back to your notes to self and integrate those into your final report. Present your learnings to colleagues and foster that conversation with everyone, and do a debrief when you're done. And I've got some references here as well. Thanks. I'll just stop sharing here.
Great, thanks so much, John and Jennifer. That was great. The first question is for Jennifer. Do you mean to say that project thinking can time box evaluative thinking or prevent the flow that's required to be successful?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm interested what you mean by like time box. I don't know if I'm interpreting that right, but I think that the latter part is yes, is what I was meaning, is that it can kind of, if we think of the project as sort of being this thing that is unquestioning, like with it, that we're just focusing on the work within the project, and we're not actually even questioning the project or the program itself, and sort of like asking those bigger, deeper questions, that can sort of like stifle evaluative thinking. Sorry, if you want to expand on that piece, I'm not sure if I'm picking up on what you mean by that. It can like time box evaluative thinking. Thanks for expanding there, Zara. I see that. Okay, so by time box, you're meaning that evaluation become a task or a milestone in a project rather than a reflexive process. So totally, yeah, that's it. Like the idea that evaluation, like program evaluation, formal program evaluation, you know, has tools and processes and follows this little beautiful arc, and you get findings and you feed them back, and that's all well and good, and that's happening over here. But evaluative thinking is like the umbrella over everything. It's infused in all of our work, and it doesn't just have to happen within the context of evaluation. It can happen everywhere by everyone. And yeah, we are, you know, kind of blocking our own selves if we are trying to just relegate it just to program evaluation.
I'll wait to see if there's a response. I had a question about sort of leading evaluative thinking. Where does that have to come from leadership, or is there an ideal place that that sort of approach to thinking starts?
Interesting question. Yeah, I think that's kind of the idea that it definitely can be championed by leadership, and that's a really important part of it. If the leadership in an organization is prioritizing evaluative thinking, saying that it matters, helping to create that kind of climate for asking these types of questions and valuing it when people bring that to the conversation. So I think there is definitely a role for leadership to play. But I think the great idea of it is that everybody can do it and has a shared responsibility for it. And there are lots of like little ways that people can make it more present in their everyday work and inspire their colleagues to do so as well. So yeah, I think it's, you know, when we think of culture, right, it permeates through everybody's role, but it is a really important part to have the leadership engage and, you know, foster this as well. It can come from the top. But even if you're not seeing that in your organization yet, I think don't give up. There's like lots of ways that everybody at every level can do it for themselves, even if it is more of an internal practice, you know, with your notes to self-document, or just your own way of trying to, you know, not just think of your own perspective, but go out and, actively try and seek others. There's little ways that you can practice it alone. Then there's ways that you can introduce it into your teamwork or, working with colleagues or partners. And then, yeah, I think the last kind of piece is if the leadership's involved and really like help shape the organizational culture that way. I don't know, John, if you have anything to add it, how it fits in with evaluation capacity building too. I think there's some overlap there too.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have much to add. I think you nailed it. Yeah, I guess the one thing too is that we don't want to, I think we place this on our participants sometimes where we ask too many evaluation questions. I think, as evaluators, I think we have to reel it back sometimes. So it's finding that happy medium sometimes too, to really, engage in a way that people aren't like, oh, here's the evaluator again.
Yeah, not good.
How do you determine what's in and out of scope in an evaluation? For example, marketing is often part of promoting a program, but how important is it to track these metrics?
I'm biased. I'm interested in everything I was saying, like, yeah, track it all. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a key part of whatever evaluation work you're doing. When you're actually doing program evaluation, you have to scope it and you have to say, not everything is within scope. We're prioritizing these evaluation questions. We're going to seek out evidence and data that can help us answer just these questions. And, that's an exercise. But yeah, I think that the idea of tracking your work and anything that can kind of tell the story about who you're reaching or who's involved, that, yeah, maybe evaluative thinking it encapsulates those things too, even if it's out of scope of your actual proper program evaluation. Maybe it's tracking it and having those conversations as part of your evaluative thinking practice.
Great. And then we have another question specifically about the term evaluative thinking. Is it a preset or step before evaluation or a mindset to keep throughout evaluation? I'm wondering where this fits in more concrete, specific, or formal M&E work, since I have not heard of it before. Just if you could clarify sort of where it fits more specifically.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that's exactly like the crux of the issue is like that. No, it's not a preset. It's not something you do first and then you're done. It's like it should go throughout the whole process of evaluation. And like as an evaluator, you are embodying this way of thinking. This is how you approach every step of your work. But then it's also the point of saying, well, it's not just going to be for evaluators doing evaluation work. It's going to be for everybody in the organization. And that's going to kind of carry forward. So even if you're working on a project or a program that doesn't have a formal evaluation component, you're not off the hook. You still could really benefit from trying to think evaluatively in the work that you are doing and infuse it in little ways throughout your work.
Connecting, I guess, both of your presentations with, I guess, more participatory evaluation, not just the planning, but more generally participatory evaluation. Where do you see the connections there?
You can go, John.
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think they really complement one another. So I think, in the participatory evaluation, you're really engaging with your participants and stakeholders in a way that, they inform you and you inform them. So it's kind of that bi-directional approach to learning. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for evaluators to come in to say, I'm going to break down what I'm doing, and then you're going to inform me if that's going to work for your organization, for the potential clients that you may serve or something like that. So I think the participatory approach allows for a more flexible application of evaluation in general. And I think evaluative thinking is part of that as well.
Yeah, and for me, the piece that jumps out, like a big part of why we do participatory work is just like recognizing that not one person is the expert, or like we don't want to center just one person's perspective, especially like the expert's kind of perspective. And that's sort of, at the core of participatory evaluation. It's also at the core of evaluative thinking of saying, okay, well, I'm just stuck in my one viewpoint, but how do I go out and actively seek out and try and, understand things from other people's perspectives? And so it's really aligned, I think, in that kind of like core recognition of that we have to, not just center our own worldview.
Do you have suggestions or examples of how to build equity in evaluative thinking or capacity building?
question.
It's an easy one.
John, do you want to start? Do you have anything that comes to mind to begin with?
I think, yeah, immediately through evaluation capacity building, I think you could perhaps kind of identify some of those gaps from your needs assessment, right? To say that we actually don't really have an EDI plan within our organization, right? So I think right off the bat, you can say, okay, this is something that we need to address and work on, and how can, that may require hiring out someone else, right? External to the organization or external to the evaluator as well. So I think that's definitely, the needs assessment piece is one way to really identify those earlier, because we don't want to, have it be identified too late in the process. So I think that's one thing that comes right off the bat.
Yeah, it makes me think then about evaluative thinking as kind of like the way that you could get to identifying the fact that you don't have an EDI plan, right? Is having somebody who is thinking evaluatively, who's like not afraid to ask those questions and to like sort of question the fundamentals of what you're doing and push that conversation a little bit further. So hopefully if you're holding space for evaluative thinking and you're trying to foster that culture in your organization where you can question everything and everything's fair game, that can help you push a bit more in some of those areas and push those conversations to happen.
I just wanted to thank you both for presenting this month. I thought that was great. Lots of great thank you comments in the comment section. And everyone else, feel free to check in on us. I'll send a follow-up email with all of the presentation info and links and information for the next session. So thanks all and have a good day.
Thanks everyone, this was fun.
Thank you.